What's happening, y'all? Back again with another chess basics video, and this one's going to be the last one. This one's about the endgame. So the endgame is really defined by the part of the game at the end of the game, but it's when the queens are off the board and a lot of pieces have been traded. Um, so generally in the endgame, since you don't have a queen, you're trying to get a queen back, and there's only one way to get a queen back, and that's to promote a pawn. And the easiest way to promote a pawn is with a passed pawn. And by definition, a passed pawn is a pawn that doesn't have any pawns that can take it. So no pawns are in its way. There's only one passed pawn on the board here. See if you can find it. It's this one right here. This pawn doesn't have a single pawn that would be able to take it. This pawn, you might think, has a clear path, but it could be taken by this pawn, right? So this defends on the diagonal. This pawn doesn't have any pawns on an adjacent file and has a clear path to promotion. So generally, the game at this point in the game will revolve around these passed pawns. So if I push this pawn, black's going to try and defend it, and I'm going to drop my rook behind it to support it. And generally, you want to bring, like, a lot of the pieces will gravitate towards this pawn. But let's say this pawn wasn't on the board. How can we make a passed pawn in this situation? And as white, there's one move that would guarantee a passed pawn, and it would be pushing this pawn forward. If white pushes this pawn forward, black can take, but then this pawn can take back, and that would result in a passed pawn. Because this pawn, if this were to happen, let's say, here, this pawn now has a clear path with no pawns that can reach it. So this would be a passed pawn. So if you don't have a passed pawn, you should try to make one. Okay, so let's go back to our previous position. The other circumstance, so I was saying that this pawn is guaranteed to be a passed pawn by pushing it. So if black doesn't trade, if black decides to push, for example, my knight's under attack, so I'd probably want to move that. But if so say I move it here, and then black can make any move, but now this pawn has nothing that's attacking it. It has no pawns that are trying to attack it. So this pawn has a clear path to promotion, and that's what you're looking for in an endgame scenario. So creating passed pawns and defending passed pawns is a super important piece because it allows you to create a queen and give yourself a huge advantage in the endgame. Another concept you want to be thinking about during the endgame is actually activating your king as an offensive piece. Most of the game is spent sort of protecting your king. Your king wants to be castled and behind a wall of pawns. But once you reach the endgame, and all of the pieces start focusing on, like, a passed pawn, say, you can bring your king towards the rest of the pieces, and it can become a real asset. So if, say, like, black's just sort of trying to defend this passed pawn, you can bring your king into the game and start threatening other pieces, and eventually use your king to assist the other pieces in capturing all of the pieces. Alright, so once you've traded off all the pieces, won all of your opponent's pieces, and you've just promoted a pawn to a queen, let's say you have a rook and a queen left, you have to know how to finish the game. And probably the most basic of all checkmates is the ladder mate. This is a really important one to know to win the game. So the concept of a ladder mate is to cut the king off and try to force it towards one of the four walls of the board. So I've brought my queen down here, and now the king can't go past my queen. In this circumstance, so let's say the king comes towards the queen. I like to get my rook just inside my queen because my queen can protect the rook. So now the king is forced to make another move, and it can't come any further this way, and it can't come any further down. So it can really only go in these two directions. So let's say it goes here. I can now bring my rook up and check the king. And now my queen has this rank cut off, and my rook is checking the king and has all of these squares. So the king is forced in this direction. It's nice to have the rook in front of the queen, the rook closer to the king than the queen if you have a rook and a queen, because my queen is defending my rook. So the king can never take my rook. But if let's say the king goes here, it's forced in this direction, and now I can continually, step by step, cut off each rank. So when my queen moves here, I have this entire rank cut off, this entire rank cut off, and the king has to continue in this direction, and eventually it'll reach the end of the board. That'll result in a checkmate. So the king goes here, my rook goes here, the pattern continues with it being cut off. It has to continue in this direction, and once it's on the edge of the board, that's game over. This is checkmate. The king has no more moves, and you win the game. So that's that's called a ladder mate, and it's a really important concept in the endgame. All right, so what happens if you promote your pawn to a queen but you don't have a rook to support it? Can you still make a checkmate? The answer is yes. It's a little bit trickier, for sure, but it still involves using the edge of the board as your friend. So if the king is in the middle of the board like this and I have my queen, I want to use my queen to push the king towards the edge of the board, and then I'm going to bring my king in to assist. So I want to get my queen as close to the king as I can while cutting it off and forcing it into a little tiny box. So as close as I can get to the king without having my queen be taken is somewhere like this, where I'm a knight's move away. So I have to be 2 squares away from the king in some direction in order to not be taken, but I also want to be as close as I can get. So now I've cut the king off in both of these directions. So the king is going to be forced to move somewhere in this direction. So let's say the king moves here. I now follow the king and try to stay a knight's move away and close this box down. So I move here and notice that I'm still a knight's move away, and the king is going to be forced in either of these directions again. So here I want to move here because that's a knight's move away. I'm cutting off the king and making this box smaller and smaller. And then again the king is going to have to move, and it's going to have to move towards the edge of the board. So I'm here. If it moves in that direction, I mirror it, I copy it and move in this direction. Eventually the king is going to be forced to the edge of the board. I will cut it off. So I'll come here, follow it in this direction. The king goes to the corner here, and now I have trapped the king on the edge of the board. In this situation, you want to make sure you don't stalemate the king, which is exactly what I just did. The king can't move. The king isn't in check, and it can't move. So this would stalemate the game, leading in a draw. The king has absolutely no squares to go to. I've just stalemated. So I don't want to make that move. The move that I want to make is probably something like this, where I cut the king off from this entire file, but it still has one move to make. So I'll let the king move here, and it can move back and forth, and now I'm going to bring my king up slowly. So the king's going to have to move back and forth. I'm going to bring my king, bring the king, bring the king, and then the king moves here, and now my king supports this square, and I can bring my queen in and give this checkmate. So that is a checkmate with a queen and a king. Little bit trickier, but also very important to know how to do. So what if I only have a pawn left with just my king on the board? This is an interesting question in chess because the answer is sometimes you can win, sometimes you can't. And it comes down to the concept of opposition. There's a situation that you can achieve where your king is looking at the other king, and you can force it in one direction. So let's say my king moves here, this king moves backwards for some reason. If I'm able to achieve this position right here, this is called opposition, where I'm opposing the opponent king. At this point, the king is going to have to move out of the way of my king. In either direction that it moves, if it moves this way, I can move this way, and it clears a path for my pawn. You can see that my pawn can be protected by my king on all 3 of these squares. And so the king's going to have to move. If it moves up the board, I just follow it, and then it's not going to be in time to get to my pawn. So let's say the king moves down now and tries to come towards my pawn. Now my pawn can come up. If it tries to move again, it can't come towards my pawn because my pawn has this blocked off, and I still have this clear path. My king is guarding the pawn. So if I can gain opposition like this and move up the board with the king, there's no way it's ever going to be able to get to my pawn. All right, so now let's say the roles are reversed. So black, you're playing against black. Black has the pawn and is trying to promote the pawn. If you're in this situation as white, you can gain opposition by moving in front of the king like this. And this is advantageous to you. So whoever makes the move in front of the king, whoever made that last move, has opposition and thus has the advantage. Because now black has to move out of the way, and you can follow, mirror that move. And if black ever tries to advance the pawn, you can just move in front of it. But black can't get this opposition in front of you. Um, so now that I moved here, the pawn can continue to push. I move straight back. Black can advance the king. As long as I'm not giving room for the black king to get here, I'm good. So I just move in front of the king. It can't advance at all. The pawn can push. I move in front of the pawn. Then black can move here. I mean, it has to defend the pawn. So black can't move forward. It's going to have to move there. You can move straight back, give some more room, and again, the king's going to advance, but it's never going to be able to get this position in front of you as long as you maintain this opposition position. So black moves here. I move here in front of the king, not allowing it to move forward. The pawn pushes. I move back. Again, the king's probably going to have to move here. That's the only position that would not lose the pawn. And then you get to here, and eventually you're going to get to the edge of the board, and black can try to push up here. I can move here. The pawn can threaten. This might look a little scary, but I just move in front of the pawn. And now this is a really important position. This is the position that you're going to gain if you don't allow black to get opposition. And now black has nowhere to go. Black can't come forward, and black can't move away from the pawn, or else I'm going to take the pawn. Black's only option now is to move here, unless it wants to lose the pawn, and then this is a stalemate. So check out this position right here. Black is taking away these two squares. The pawn is taking away these two squares. I can't move my king at all, and I'm not in check, and that's a stalemate in chess. So in general, you want to avoid this if you're feeling like you have an advantage in chess. You can't stalemate your opponent, but I wanted to get stalemated because I didn't have any pieces left. This was my desired position, and now I'm forced to draw. So if you can avoid letting your opponent gain opposition on you in the endgame with one pawn remaining, you're going to win. You're going to draw the game, and that's the ultimate goal. All right, so that'll do it for this video. Yeah, so that's just a few things to be thinking about during the endgame. Obviously, just a few situations that we covered. There's a lot more complexities to what's happening in an endgame, but some really important beginner knowledge to have. With a few of these tactics, you'll be able to win some games for sure. So keep all this stuff in mind and keep on your learning journey. Thanks for watching. Catch you later.